On a normal day, under an ordinary sky, a single street in London suddenly transformed into the center of a tragedy no one saw coming. Cars stopped, residents froze, and a calm neighborhood became the backdrop of a targeted attack that would leave an entire community questioning how something so violent could erupt in broad daylight. This is the story of Robert Powell, a man who never expected danger to follow him into the open, and a case that revealed how quickly a quiet street can become a crime scene. Robert Powell's final day began like any other, wrapped in the familiar rhythm of city life. The streets were alive with their usual sounds, children heading to school, neighbors exchanging brief morning greetings, the hum of passing cars. It was the kind of day that felt predictable, almost comforting in its simplicity. Nothing about the early hours suggested danger. Nothing hinted that a confrontation was already forming in the shadows. Robert, a man known for his calm presence and easygoing manner, moved through the morning without any sign that he sensed the storm approaching. Yet somewhere in the city, plans were already being discussed. Tensions were escalating, and decisions were being made that would intersect with his path before the sun set. The story of Robert Powell's murder is rooted not only in the tragic moment that took his life, but in the rising tensions that began long before that day. Police records and witness accounts later revealed that disputes and disagreements had been simmering beneath the surface. Personal conflicts, grudges, or unresolved issues, the exact causes varied depending on who was asked. But one thing was clear: the confrontation that unfolded was not random. Someone had decided that Robert was a target, and on that particular day, the opportunity presented itself in a way they chose not to ignore. Robert drove into the area of the incident in the early afternoon. The sun was still high, neighbors were outdoors, and the world looked too open, too public for anyone to imagine a violent act could take place. It was broad daylight, with witnesses everywhere, children playing, adults chatting on front steps, people returning from errands. But the attackers who approached Robert were not concerned about being seen. Their movements showed purpose, as though they believed speed and surprise would shield them from consequences. When the confrontation began, it shocked everyone within sight. Residents later described the moment as surreal, the kind of thing you expect to see in films, not on a quiet residential street you've lived on for years. People froze, uncertain whether to run, hide, or intervene. In seconds, the peace of the neighborhood was shattered. Parents pulled their children inside, shop owners ducked behind counters, and a silence fell over the street after the chaos ended, a silence so heavy that even the air felt different. Witnesses immediately called emergency services. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances filled the road, lights flashing against the houses that had moments earlier been touched only by the sun. Officers blocked off the area, urging residents to stay inside while they assessed the scene. Neighbors stood behind curtains or on their porches in disbelief, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. A man who had walked these streets for years, who many recognized by name or at least by face, had become the center of a tragedy that would ripple far beyond that small community. As paramedics worked, investigators began quickly gathering early statements. Shocked witnesses described seeing a small group of individuals approach Robert with urgency and determination. The attack was fast, focused, and clearly planned. There was no sign of hesitation, only intent. That detail became a critical part of the investigation. This was not an argument that spiraled out of control, nor a spontaneous act of anger. It was deliberate. Robert's family received the devastating news later that day. What should have been another ordinary evening became a moment that divided their lives into before and after. The grief that washed over them spread across the community as news reached the broader public. People who didn't know Robert personally still felt shaken. The idea that such violence could erupt in daylight with no warning unsettled residents across London. It was not only a tragedy, but a message that the lines between everyday life and sudden danger could be thinner than anyone liked to believe. Police launched a major investigation, setting up a task team to review footage, analyze phone records, and interview the dozens of witnesses who had seen the confrontation from different angles. CCTV from nearby homes, shops, and traffic cameras became invaluable. Investigators pieced together the attackers' movements, tracing their route before and after the incident. The early stages of the inquiry revealed a chilling truth. The attack had been coordinated with precision. The offenders had moved with purpose, communicated beforehand, and chosen their timing carefully. Detectives worked day and night, cross-checking statements and mapping timelines. Community members came forward, providing additional details, some small, some significant. A car that didn't belong on the street, a group of individuals walking unusually quickly, a stranger's voice overheard moments before the attack. Each detail helped reconstruct the mosaic of events leading up to the murder. As the investigation gained momentum, police began identifying potential suspects. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became that this was tied to a broader dispute, one that roots long before that afternoon. The question was no longer why, but who had decided the final confrontation would happen in daylight, in public, and without fear of being seen. Detectives kept digging, assembling a picture of relationships, conflicts, and connections that eventually pointed directly towards those responsible. While the investigation continued, the neighborhood tried to return to normal, but traces of the tragedy hung in the air. Flowers appeared on the pavement. Messages of support were left for Robert's family. Residents spoke more softly, moved more cautiously, and looked over their shoulders more often. The street had changed. What once felt predictable now felt fragile. But as police progress grew clearer, hope slowly surfaced. The hope that justice would be served. The promise that what happened to Robert would not be forgotten, nor would it go unanswered. The quiet determination of investigators and the courage of witnesses would eventually bring the truth fully into the open. The murder of Robert Powell had not only shattered his family, but deeply unsettled the entire neighborhood. The boldness of the attack, the timing, the location, the precision, was something rarely seen outside large-scale organized violence. And for detectives, that boldness was both a curse and a clue. Because while the murderer had acted with chilling confidence, confidence often leaves footprints. As uniformed officers secured the scene, detectives from the major crime unit arrived, moving silently, studying everything with the heavy stillness of people who have walked into tragedy too many times. They counted shell casings, marked footprints, and spoke with shaken witnesses who could barely make sense of what they had seen. A few were trembling, some were crying, and some were so shocked they could barely speak, but every detail mattered. Throughout the afternoon, detectives kept asking the same question: why Robert? He had no major criminal record, no documented threats, no known enemies. His life showed no clear reason for anyone to target him so brutally. And that mystery placed enormous pressure on investigators because if the motive was unclear, the danger might not be over. CCTV became their first real window into the truth. Cameras from shops, buses, private driveways, and street corners began painting a picture of the shooter's movements. A blurred figure, a vehicle moving slowly, a shape stepping out. The muzzle flash captured in a single frozen frame. The getaway car speeding off. Piece by piece, pixels began to speak. Detectives widened the radius, 5 streets, 10 streets, then the surrounding neighborhood. What they eventually found was something small but powerful. The vehicle used in the escape had been circling earlier that morning. Not once, not twice, several times. This wasn't random, this wasn't emotional. This was a planned, targeted hit. The next breakthrough came from witness statements. Several people remembered seeing the same car days before the murder, parked for long periods with someone sitting inside, head lowered, pretending to be on their phone.
Others recalled a figure in a hooded jacket watching Robert's regular walking route. The chilling reality became clear. Robert had been under surveillance. Someone had been studying his habits, mapping his movements, learning exactly when he would be most vulnerable. But who? When detectives began to dig into Robert's personal life, they uncovered a quiet storm, one he had never spoken publicly about. A recent argument, a dispute, a falling out with someone who, at first glance, did not seem capable of orchestrating violence. But as investigators followed the threads, those threads began to twist into something far darker. Patterns of jealousy, tension, old claims resurfacing, and one person who had both the motive and the bitterness to set something terrible in motion. Still, motive wasn't enough. Detectives needed evidence strong enough to hold in court, and that came from a place no one expected: mobile phone data. As tower pings and message logs came together, a startling pattern appeared. On the morning of the murder, a phone belonging to a known associate of the suspected organizer had been in the same locations as the getaway car. Hours before the killing, minutes before the killing, and moments after. The digital trail began to tighten around the suspects like a tightening net. Meanwhile, forensic analysis delivered another blow. Fibers found inside the abandoned getaway car matched clothing recovered from one of the main persons of interest, and that clothing, tested in the lab, carried microscopic residue consistent with having been near recently discharged firearms. Nothing graphic, but enough to make investigators' eyebrows rise. Detectives now had motive, planning, surveillance, and physical evidence, yet the person they believed had orchestrated everything still wasn't talking. Interviews were tense and strategically orchestrated. Investigators approached with calm persistence, knowing that overconfidence cracks when facts are laid out slowly, piece by piece. They presented photos, they presented timelines, they presented phone data that showed the suspect's movements were not coincidence, but connection. Hours passed. Silence eventually broke. Not with a confession, but with a mistake. The suspect changed their story, then changed it again, and then changed it again. Inconsistent alibis are often the first real confession. Back outside the interview rooms, officers felt the mood shift. The case no longer felt like a fog, it felt like a path. And on that path, they were getting closer to the truth behind Robert Powell's death. When arrests were made, the community reacted with a complex mix of relief and grief. Relief that the person responsible for tearing apart the quiet morning had been caught, and grief that the answers did nothing to soften the reality of the loss. As the case moved toward court, prosecutors built the narrative with careful, unbiased precision. CCTV sequences, witness statements, phone records, vehicle traces, all woven together to show the jury how the killing was not a moment of chaos, but a deliberate, coordinated attack. The courtroom felt heavy as the timeline unfolded, each detail a reminder of how quickly a life can be stolen. Robert Powell's family attended every session, carrying the weight of his memory with dignity. They listened to the facts, the arguments, and the cold details. They were not looking for vengeance, they were looking for truth. When the verdict finally arrived, it echoed across the courtroom like a long-held breath being released. Guilty. The planning, the targeting, the attempted escape, all of it had caught up. Justice, slow but steady, had arrived. But justice, as always, could never rewind the moment that changed everything. Robert's name became more than a headline. It became a reminder of how fragile an ordinary day can be. A reminder that violence leaves ripples far beyond a single street. And a reminder that even in moments of darkness, communities and families can rise, demand answers, and push for justice with quiet strength. His story remains a testament to resilience, to truth, and to the tireless work of investigators who refused to let a broad daylight killing fade into silence.